He was just there to fix the heater, but when she mistook him for the help, he said yes to one dance and changed both their lives forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? Ethan Cole was wiping the last streak of motor oil from his hands when the shop phone rang. He almost didn't answer. His shift had ended 20 minutes ago, and Lily was probably sitting on the front steps of her school by now, swinging her legs and watching the other kids leave with their parents. But something about the way the phone just kept ringing made him reach for it anyway. "Cole Repairs," he said, trying not to sound as tired as he felt. A woman's voice crackled on the line, clipped and urgent. "Is this Mr. Cole? We were given your number by the property manager. Our heating unit has gone out, and we have a private event starting in 2 hours." Ethan blinked. "Where is this?" "The Avalon Grand," she said, as if the name alone should have cleared up everything. He looked at the time. 6:20. "That's over an hour away," he said carefully. "I understand," the woman replied, her tone softening just a bit. "But we were told you're the best, and frankly, we're desperate." Ethan looked down at his boots, still streaked with grease, then out the garage window at the darkening sky. Snow was expected. Lily was waiting. But something about the words, "You're the best," landed differently. He hadn't heard that in a long time. He sighed. "Text me the address. I'll be there as soon as I can." He called Mrs. Garrison next door and asked if she could grab Lily from school. She didn't hesitate. "Of course, hon. Lily's already helping me peel carrots." By the time Ethan pulled up to the Avalon Grand, the snow was starting to fall in soft flurries. The building loomed with gold-lit windows and manicured hedges wrapped in white twinkle lights. He parked in the service lot, grabbed his toolbox, and walked in through the back entrance. Inside, everything smelled like roses and wealth. Waiters in black vests floated past, carrying trays of champagne. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and in the corner, near the ballroom entrance, a flustered man in a headset waved him over. "You're the repair guy?" Ethan nodded. "Where's the unit?" He didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just another job. Somewhere in that glittering room, a woman in a silver dress was waiting, and nothing in his life would ever be the same after tonight. The warmth hit Ethan the second he stepped inside the Avalon Grand's ballroom corridor. Not from the faulty heater, he hadn't even touched it yet, but from the soft, golden light spilling through crystal sconces, the polished marble floors, and the low hum of string instruments warming up in the distance. Everything glowed, everything shimmered, and Ethan didn't. He had changed in the truck. His usual flannel was swapped for the only black button-down he owned, paired with slacks that had been ironed with the back of a book last Christmas. It wasn't a tux. It wasn't even the right shade of black, but it was clean, and for a job like this it was good enough. Apparently, it was too good. The moment he stepped past the main ballroom doors, a woman in heels and panic grabbed him by the elbow. "Finally, the past hors d'oeuvres are backed up in the West Hall. Go!" Ethan opened his mouth, ready to explain, but she was already halfway down the corridor, barking into a headset. He blinked, looked down at his shirt, looked around. Everyone here looked like they belonged. White gloves, name tags, earpieces. The waitstaff moved like a ballet troupe, orchestrated and invisible. Ethan took one step back, hoping to quietly disappear toward the service stairwell, but then another hand tapped his shoulder. "Sir," a guest said, handing him an empty champagne flute. This was flat. Ethan stared at the glass, then smiled faintly. "I'll get right on it." He placed it gently on a silver tray at the nearest bar and slipped away down the side hall, toolbox in hand, heart pounding with the quiet dread of being somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. The boiler room was tucked behind a linen closet and marked with a simple red tag. Finally, familiar territory. Wires, valves, and the steady hum of something not working right. As he crouched beside the unit, tools clinking softly in the silence, Ethan let out a slow breath. Just fix it. Don't get noticed. Don't break anything fancy, then leave. What he didn't see, what he couldn't see, was that down the hall a woman in a silver dress had already noticed the man with grease under his nails and eyes full of stories. Evelyn Sinclair had been making rounds all night, moving from smile to handshake to compliment like a perfectly rehearsed melody. Her silver gown shimmered beneath the ballroom chandeliers, catching the eye of every guest she passed. To them, she was everything expected of the Sinclair legacy: elegance, poise, control. But inside, she felt like a mannequin on display. Again. The gala was beautiful, yes. The food was exquisite. The guests, old money, new power, and everything in between, mingled with practiced grace. But the laughter was hollow, the conversations mechanical, and no one asked her a question that wasn't tied to mergers, expansion, or board projections. She slipped away from the center of the crowd, drifting to the edge of the room near the service corridor, where the lights weren't as harsh and the music softened into the background. That's when she saw him. He wasn't like the others. No tuxedo, no name tag, no polished shoes or practiced smile, just a man in a black shirt and slacks, walking with quiet purpose and a metal toolbox in one hand. He paused near the bar, placed a champagne glass on a tray, then disappeared down a hallway as if he didn't belong here, because he didn't. But he didn't look embarrassed or nervous. He looked focused. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. Something about him tugged at her curiosity. He hadn't tried to impress anyone, hadn't looked around for approval. He moved like a man who had work to do and didn't care if anyone saw him. She turned back toward the crowd, forcing herself to smile at a passing investor. But her gaze flicked back to the hallway he'd entered. For the first time that evening, something unpredictable had entered the room, and she felt more awake than she had all night. She didn't know his name, didn't know if he was a waiter, a technician, or someone who'd slipped in through the back. But Evelyn Sinclair, who'd seen every kind of man money could attract, was suddenly wondering about the one man who didn't seem to want a single thing from her. And that made her want to know more. Ethan was tightening the last bolt on the heating unit when the hum of the ballroom music shifted. It wasn't just louder. It was fuller, warmer. The string swelled into something slow and graceful, the kind of melody you didn't just hear, you felt. He closed the panel, ran a final check, and brushed off his hands on the back of his slacks. Done. Time to leave before someone else mistook him for the staff. He stepped back into the hallway, toolbox in hand, and nearly collided with a woman standing just outside the ballroom doors. Silver dress, dark hair, calm eyes that seemed to cut straight through the noise of the world. "Oh, sorry," he muttered, stepping aside. But she didn't move. She studied him for a beat longer than most people ever did. "Did you just fix the heat?" Ethan nodded, unsure why her voice made him forget how to stand still. "Yeah, should hold now." She smiled. "You're not with the catering team, are you?" He shook his head. "Just the repair guy." Something in her eyes flickered. Amusement, maybe. Or interest. "You danced better with that toolbox than most of the men inside do with their dates?" He chuckled under his breath, not sure what to say. Then she did something he never saw coming. "Would you dance with me?" He blinked. "What?" She motioned toward the ballroom, the music swelling behind her. "One song, just for fun." Ethan hesitated. His boots weren't ballroom shoes. His shirt had smudges of grease. He had a daughter waiting at home, and a truck with bad alignment and barely enough gas to get there. And yet, he set the toolbox down beside the wall. Inside, no one looked twice as the woman in silver led him onto the floor. She placed one hand gently on his shoulder, and he rested his against the small of her back, cautious but steady. They danced, slowly, wordlessly, and for one surreal minute, in a room where he didn't belong, Ethan Cole forgot everything: bills, oil stains, broken toasters, because somehow this woman, who clearly had everything, had chosen to dance with him. The ballroom lights softened to a golden haze as they moved together in slow, measured steps. Evelyn's hand was light against Ethan's shoulder, her eyes steady and unreadable. Around them, the gala continued its graceful whirl, laughter, glasses clinking, conversations about stock portfolios and summer homes in Santorini. But inside their small circle of music and movement, the noise felt far away. "You don't talk much," Evelyn said, her voice low and smooth, barely audible over the orchestra. Ethan shrugged, offering the faintest smile. "Not sure I'm dressed for deep conversation." Her eyes flicked down to his shirt, then back up. "You wear it better than half the tuxes in here." He didn't answer right away. He didn't know how to explain that this shirt had been folded in a drawer for 3 years, only worn to job interviews that didn't call him back. "So if you're not catering and you're not on the guest list, who are you?" she asked. He could have told her. Could have said, "I'm Ethan Cole. I change out spark plugs and patch up radiators in a town too small to be on most maps. I've got a daughter at home, 7 years old, missing a front tooth, and asking Santa for a dog we can't afford. I didn't belong here when I walked in, and I'll be gone before the ice sculptures start to melt." But instead he said, "Just a guy who got called in for a fix." She tilted her head, amused. "Mysterious. I like that." Ethan looked away for a second, focusing on their steps. He didn't want to lie. He just didn't want her to see the parts of him that didn't sparkle under these lights. "And you?" he asked, turning the question back. "Who are you when you're not dressed like a chandelier?" She smiled, the first real one he'd seen all night. "I'm Evelyn." Just Evelyn. No last name, no title. In that moment she wasn't the richest woman in the room, and he wasn't the poorest man. They danced until the song ended, and neither of them said what they were really thinking, because for now it was enough to just exist in a moment that didn't require explanations. The front porch light flickered as Ethan pulled into the gravel driveway, the crunch of tires breaking the quiet of the street. The old truck rattled as it shut off, headlights dimming on the crooked steps that led to the front door of their small rented house. The snowfall had thickened while he was gone, blanketing the yard and softening the edges of everything. Inside, warmth greeted him, not from luxury chandeliers or heated marble floors, but from the familiar scent of cinnamon tea and old hardwood. Mrs. Garrison, their retired neighbor and self-appointed grandma on call, stood in the kitchen peeling an apple with the precision of a surgeon. "You're late?" she said, glancing over her glasses. She tried to wait up. Ethan set down his toolbox and managed a tired smile. "Long job. How was she?" "Good as gold. Helped me make a pie crust and then fell asleep halfway through her second storybook. She's on the couch." Ethan walked into the living room, where a quilt was bundled around a small shape. Emily lay curled up with one arm tucked under her cheek, her stuffed bear pressed to her chest. Her hair was a mess of curls, her cheeks pink from the fireplace's glow. She looked peaceful, safe. He crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair off her forehead. "I danced," he whispered, like a secret between them. He hadn't planned on it, hadn't meant to stay longer than the job required. But somehow, a silver dress and a question had pulled him into something he still didn't understand. He kissed Emily's forehead, then gently scooped her into his arms. She stirred only slightly, murmuring something about marshmallows in her sleep. Upstairs, he tucked her into bed, making a mental note to return Mrs. Garrison's casserole dish and buy more apple juice. Downstairs, the silence settled again. Ethan stood at the sink, staring out at the snow-covered lawn. He should have felt out of place at that gala. He had felt out of place. But with her, just for those few minutes, it hadn't mattered. For once, someone had looked at him without seeing what he lacked. And he wasn't sure what to do with that. Evelyn sat at her desk the next morning, the skyline of the city stretched wide behind her floor-to-ceiling windows. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but her corner office in the Sinclair Tower was already bathed in a soft, cold light. A half-drunk coffee sat on a stack of investor reports, untouched since her assistant left it there over an hour ago. For once, Evelyn wasn't reading. She was thinking, or more accurately, replaying. The dance, his voice, that guarded smile. She leaned back in her chair, pressing her fingers to her temples. She had spoken to dozens of people that night, clients, shareholders, executives, all of them polished, eager, transactional. But none of them stayed with her like he did, the man in the black shirt, the one who moved like he didn't care who watched, the one who didn't try to impress her. He hadn't told her his name, hadn't asked for hers, and now it was bothering her more than it should. "Allie," Evelyn called out, and her assistant appeared instantly in the doorway. "Yes?" "Do we have a list of everyone who worked last night's gala? Staff, catering, AV, maintenance, anyone not on the guest list?" Allie blinked. "Not yet, but I can get it." "Good, get it," Evelyn said, a little too quickly. "Especially the vendors. I want names. The man who fixed the heater. I need to find him." Allie hesitated. "Did something happen?" Evelyn paused. "No, not like that. I just forgot to thank him." It wasn't a lie, not really. She'd said thank you with a dance, with a smile, but she hadn't said the words. And something about the way he carried himself, quiet, capable, unreachable, stuck with her like a line from a half-finished song. After Allie left, Evelyn walked over to the window and looked out at the city below. Somewhere out there was a man who didn't fit the world she lived in, and yet had made it feel more real than anything had in months. She didn't know who he was, but she knew this: she was going to find him. The next day at Cole's Auto and Repairs started like any other. Cold air, burnt coffee, and a pickup truck that wouldn't shift into reverse. Ethan stood beneath the lift, grease already working its way back under his fingernails, wrench in hand and country radio humming through the dusty speakers in the corner. "Hey, Mr. Fancy Feet," Nate joked from across the garage, grinning as he wiped down a carburetor. "You done tangoing with high society or what?" Ethan chuckled and shook his head. "It was a slow waltz. Don't get carried away." "Still can't believe you went to the Avalon Grand," Nate said, "let alone danced with someone. And here I thought the only woman in your life was Emily." Ethan just smirked and ducked back under the truck. "It was a fluke. I was there to fix the heat. That's it." But the truth was, he'd thought about her. All morning, between oil changes and brake checks, between adjusting a fan belt and refilling the tire inflator, he kept seeing the way she tilted her head when she asked him to dance, the cool elegance in her voice, the warmth in her eyes that didn't match her diamond-draped world. He hadn't meant to leave without giving his name, but it had felt easier that way, cleaner. What was he supposed to say? "I'm Ethan Cole. I patch up radiators and eat off paper plates with my kid." "Nice to meet you, Queen of the Ballroom." It wouldn't have mattered. People like her didn't come back. Not to places like this. The bell over the garage door jingled. An elderly man entered with a squeaky cane and a rattle in his engine. Ethan greeted him like always, with a smile, a rag in his back pocket, and hands that smelled faintly of gasoline and pine soap. But when the man left and the shop fell quiet again, Ethan leaned back against the workbench and glanced toward the window. The snow was beginning to melt, dripping slowly from the awning in steady taps. He told himself it was nothing, just a dance. But somewhere deep in the back of his mind, he kept wondering if she was still thinking about it too. Evelyn hadn't even remembered the camera. Not really. There were always photographers at events like that, slinking between champagne flutes and floral arrangements, catching candid moments and curating the illusion of effortless glamour. She was used to it. She smiled when expected, posed when prompted, and moved on before the flash finished fading. But 3 days later, as she flipped through a glossy copy of City and Style that her assistant left on her desk, something caught her breath. Page 9, a 2-page spread, the headline, "Gala of the Season, Evelyn Sinclair Shines at Avalon Grand." There she was, mid-laugh, silver dress catching the chandelier light like spun frost, posture perfect, charm effortless. It was a great photo, too great, because she wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking at him. Over her shoulder, slightly out of focus, stood the man with the toolbox. His shirt untucked just slightly at the hem, his posture stiff, as if unsure whether he was supposed to be standing there at all. No name, no caption, just a glance in her direction, 1 second before the music had started. Evelyn stared at the photo longer than she meant to. The world had caught something she couldn't fake. Curiosity, connection, a moment that didn't belong in a magazine at all. By noon, the image had gone viral. The tabloids gave him a name, the mystery mechanic. Social media turned him into a meme. When the repair guy looks better than the groomsman. Threads buzzed with speculation. Who was he? Why hadn't he been seen before? Was it a secret romance? A publicity stunt? A fairy tale in the making? Evelyn said nothing, not yet. But she saved the photo to her phone, not for the headlines, not for the comments, for the way he looked at her like he wasn't supposed to, but couldn't help it. And somewhere in a small garage just outside the city, Ethan Cole didn't even know that his face was already circling the internet. Because he didn't have Instagram, or Twitter, or time for fantasy. But fantasy, it seemed, had time for him. The clatter of tools and hum of an air compressor filled the garage as Ethan wiped down a set of brake pads, lost in the kind of rhythm only a long workday could provide. The sound of tires crunching the gravel outside didn't register at first. Customers came and went. But when the office door opened and the bell gave its sharp little jingle, something felt off. The footsteps that followed were too confident, too polished. Ethan glanced up to see a man in a tan trench coat, holding a notepad and flashing a press badge like it was a VIP pass to a concert no one wanted. "Ethan Cole?" the man asked, already flipping a page. Ethan paused, his hands still stained with engine grease. "That's me." "Jeremy Price, Metro Current. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Ethan raised a brow. "Depends. About what?" The reporter smiled like he'd caught a fish nibbling the line. "About the Avalon Grand Gala. Specifically, a certain dance with Evelyn Sinclair. Some people online think you're the man in that photo." Ethan's expression didn't change. He set the rag down, leaned back slightly against the workbench, and crossed his arms. "Must have been a lot of people at that event," he said carefully. "Could have been anyone." Jeremy leaned in. "Could have. But you do kind of match the mystery guy's look, and your name came up with the building's emergency maintenance records." Ethan forced a chuckle. "Look, man, I fix heaters. I don't waltz with CEOs. You got the wrong guy." The reporter's smile thinned. "Sure, but if you were him, it'd make a hell of a story, don't you think?" "I'm not," Ethan replied, already turning back toward the workbench. Jeremy scribbled something down anyway. "All right, thanks for your time." As the bell jingled again and the reporter disappeared, Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He turned back to his tools, only to find Emily standing in the office doorway, a juice box in one hand and a puzzled look in her eyes. "Daddy," she said slowly, "did you really dance with a princess?" Ethan froze. He'd been careful not to tell her, but now, looking at her wide eyes and hopeful grin, the lie felt heavier than he expected. "Not a princess," he murmured, kneeling beside her. "Just a really kind lady in a silver dress." Emily nodded, considering. "Is she going to dance with you again?" Ethan smiled, soft and unsure. "I don't know, sweetheart. I really don't." Emily Cole never meant to start a wildfire. It began innocently enough, during snack time at Maple Ridge Elementary. She was sitting at the corner of the lunch table, peeling the sticker off her banana and talking to Ava Mitchell about unicorn backpacks when the conversation shifted, like it always did, toward parents. "My mom's in real estate," Ava said, proudly crunching her carrots. "She sold 3 houses this month." Emily didn't blink. "My dad danced with a fancy lady in a silver dress." Ava's jaw dropped. "What? Like at a wedding?" "Nope." Emily leaned in, whispering dramatically. "At a ball. with chandeliers and waiters. Ava gasped, and within seconds, 3 more kids had turned around in their seats. "You mean like a real ball?" one boy asked, eyes wide. "Like Cinderella?" Emily nodded. "Yup, he fixed the heat and then she asked him to dance. He didn't even wear a tux, just his nice shirt. He said she was kind." The word spread fast. By recess, it had made its way to 2 teachers and the front office secretary. By the final bell, parents were picking up their kids and getting an earful of secondhand fairy tale from the back seat. By dinner time, Maplewood had questions. Ethan found out the next morning when he walked into the grocery store and the cashier smiled wider than usual. "Nice moves, Mr. Cole," she teased, sliding a loaf of bread across the scanner. He furrowed his brow. "Sorry?" "Your daughter's quite the storyteller," she added with a wink. "Silver dress, chandeliers, mystery woman. You should write a book." By the time he reached the hardware store, the clerk there raised an eyebrow and said, "Heard you rubbed elbows with royalty." Ethan knew then, whatever quiet he thought he had, it was gone. Small towns didn't need facts, they just needed a whisper. Back at home, Emily sat cross-legged on the couch, watching cartoons and munching on dry cereal. Ethan sat beside her, arms crossed. "Did you tell someone about the dance?" She looked up, her mouth full. "I told Ava. Why?" He groaned and rubbed his face. Emily tilted her head. "Was it supposed to be a secret?" Ethan sighed. "It was supposed to be quiet." Emily grinned. "Well, now it's famous." The morning was quiet at Cole's Auto, the kind of slow start Ethan appreciated. He was halfway through rotating the tires on an old station wagon when he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Not rushed, not frantic, but intentional. He glanced up, expecting a regular. Instead, he saw the silver sedan, sleek, spotless, out of place. He wiped his hands on a rag stepping out from under the hood just as the door opened. She stepped out alone. No chauffeur, no assistant trailing behind with a clipboard. Just Evelyn Sinclair in dark jeans, a wool coat, and sunglasses that couldn't quite hide the look in her eyes. And in her hand, a to-go tray with 2 coffees. Ethan stood still, his breath hitching for reasons he didn't want to admit. The last time he saw her, there were chandeliers and violins. Now, there was engine grease under his nails and the scent of motor oil in the air. She didn't flinch. "Hi," she said, walking toward him, her heels crunching softly over the gravel. "I figured I owed you a coffee." Ethan blinked. "How did you—" "Building maintenance records," she said, offering the drink, "and a very persistent assistant." He took the cup slowly, still not sure this was real. "You came all this way, just for coffee?" "No," she said, pausing. "I came to ask a question." Ethan nodded once, cautiously. "All right." She looked at him, steady and quiet, as if still trying to match this dusty garage with a man who danced like he didn't need to belong. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "Because I didn't want the dance to change." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "I didn't want you looking at me like I was some kind of charity case," he said gently. "That night, I wasn't a mechanic or a single dad or some guy with overdue utility bills. I was just someone who was there, with you." Evelyn didn't respond right away. She just smiled, soft, real, and took a sip of her coffee. "Well," she said quietly, "now I know exactly who you are." And she stayed. They sat on 2 overturned milk crates just outside the garage bay, the winter sun casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The coffee between them had gone lukewarm, but neither noticed. For a long while Evelyn didn't speak, and Ethan didn't push the silence. He just sipped, watching a squirrel dart across the fence line, trying to figure out how to say what he hadn't told anyone in years. "You know," he finally said, "people think being invisible is the worst part. It's not." Evelyn turned slightly, her brow furrowed but open. "It's being seen," he continued. "But only for the struggle, as if that's all I am. People talk slower around me when they find out I'm a single dad, like I'm fragile, or tragic, or somehow less. He looked down at his hands, calloused and stained, the evidence of work that never stopped. That night, I didn't want to be the guy patching radiators for half price. I didn't want pity or headlines or anyone asking me what it's like to raise a kid alone on $20 and prayer. He exhaled slowly. I just wanted to be someone, just once, to look across the floor and have someone see me, not the circumstances, not the story. Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. She didn't interrupt. And that, more than anything, made him feel like she heard him. I didn't tell you because I didn't want the moment to shrink under reality, he added. It was perfect, and I didn't want to break it. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, hands wrapped around the cooling paper cup. You didn't break anything, Ethan, she said gently. You made something honest. He looked at her, eyes a little too tired for someone his age, but still holding on to something fierce and flickering. I wasn't looking for a story, she added, but maybe the ones worth telling are the ones people don't try to sell. Ethan smiled, wary but grateful. You always talk like that? She grinned. Only when I'm sitting on a milk crate next to a man who thinks he isn't remarkable. And in that quiet, oil-scented corner of the world, he started to believe maybe he was. The snow had started again by mid-morning, fine, steady flakes that dusted the rooftops and muffled the town in a soft hush. Ethan was halfway under the hood of a rusty '97 Civic when he heard the unmistakable sound of heels on concrete. He didn't even look up. We're booked for oil changes and broken dreams today, he called out. If it's anything more than that, I'm going to need coffee first. I brought coffee, said a familiar voice. He turned, blinking. There she was, Evelyn Sinclair, in jeans and a wool coat, her hair tied back, snow gathering in her lashes like it had no idea who she was. She held up the drink tray with a grin. And I brought these. Ethan wiped his hands, walked over, and accepted the coffee like it was fragile. To what do I owe the honor this time? Evelyn set down the tray, then reached behind her back and produced something else. A small red toolbox. I figured, she said, brushing snow from her coat, you've already fixed something for me. Maybe it's my turn. He raised an eyebrow. You want to fix what exactly? She glanced toward the corner of the shop where the portable heater had been giving off nothing but rattles and complaints all winter. That thing. It's been wheezing louder than your truck. I figure we start there. Ethan crossed his arms, skeptical. You ever held a socket wrench before? I once installed a bookshelf without crying, she said. How hard can this be? That made him laugh, full and unfiltered. Minutes later, she was crouched on the floor, sleeves rolled up, eyebrows furrowed in concentration as he showed her how to disassemble the front panel. Her manicured nails chipped a little. Her coat got dusty, but she never complained, not once. And when she managed to realign the fan blade by herself, she lit up like a kid winning a science fair. You just fixed heat, he said, half impressed, half amused. She wiped her forehead dramatically. So this is what accomplishment smells like, grease and victory. Ethan grinned. Next thing I know, you'll be changing brake pads. Evelyn smirked. One miracle at a time. And as the heater whirred quietly back to life behind them, Ethan realized something simple but profound. This woman didn't just visit his world. She stepped into it, on purpose. Maplewood was the kind of town where secrets didn't stay secrets. They baked themselves into pies at church potlucks, rode along with mail carriers, and echoed off barbershop chairs by noon the next day. So when Evelyn Sinclair, the Evelyn Sinclair, was spotted in jeans and boots, elbow-deep in an old space heater beside Ethan Cole, the town didn't just notice. It buzzed. At the diner, people leaned over steaming coffee cups and whispered like they were passing classified intel. Saw her with her hand on a wrench, one said. Swear she even laughed when it slipped. At the post office, someone claimed they watched her hand Ethan a greasy rag, like she'd been born in that garage. And not like she was pretending either, they added, brows raised, like she belonged. And at the hardware store, 3 people stood in line behind her and debated whether she was the real deal or just a look-alike with good bone structure and a soft spot for mechanics. Ethan didn't hear most of it. He was too busy trying to pretend things hadn't changed, that the woman in the wool coat wasn't the same one gracing billboards 3 counties over, that she hadn't just sat on his shop floor joking about torque wrenches and wiping her hands on her designer jeans like it was normal. But even he couldn't ignore the shift when he walked Emily to school and felt the eyes on him. Not cruel, just curious. At the grocery store, Mrs. Finley at checkout smiled a little too knowingly. New friend helping out at the garage? Something like that, Ethan said, scanning the floor tiles, like they might offer an exit. By the time he reached the garage again, someone had taped a printout of the magazine photo, on the break room fridge. Ethan pulled it down without a word, folded it neatly, and slid it into his back pocket. He wasn't ashamed, but he wasn't ready either. Evelyn, meanwhile, seemed utterly unbothered. She showed up again the next morning, same coffee, same smile, and didn't flinch when the waitress at the diner stared too long, because while the town whispered about her laughing at a mechanic's joke, Evelyn already knew the truth. She wasn't laughing at him. She was falling into something real. Ethan hadn't meant for it to happen. He was halfway through closing the garage, stacking oil cans and locking up the tool chest, when Evelyn appeared again, this time holding a pizza box like a peace offering. Her heels were traded for sneakers, and her coat hung loose over a hoodie that probably hadn't seen a gala in its life. "I figured you hadn't eaten," she said, lifting the box just enough to reveal the steam escaping from a pepperoni and mushroom combo. "And I have a serious flaw. I don't know how to eat good pizza alone." Ethan stared at her for a beat, unsure what to do with a billionaire holding dinner on his cracked sidewalk. Then from the open front door behind him came a high-pitched voice. "Is that pizza?" "Emily." Ethan turned. What did I say about shouting from the door?" "Only do it when it's important," she said, already halfway to the porch. "And pizza is very important." Evelyn laughed. "See, she gets it." Minutes later, they sat on the living room floor. 3 paper plates, 2 bottles of root beer, and a napkin pyramid that was losing its structural integrity. Emily chatted nonstop, filling Evelyn in on school projects, her friend Ava's unfortunate haircut, and why broccoli was not a dinner food, no matter what adults said. Evelyn listened with more attention than most people gave in boardrooms. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't glancing at a watch or checking her phone. She laughed when Emily told jokes that didn't have punchlines and smiled when Ethan corrected her grammar mid-sentence, gently but firmly. Ethan watched them. His daughter, curled up beside a woman who'd once been just a headline, now sipping root beer like she'd always belonged here. And Evelyn, her makeup faded, her hair down, no diamond necklace in sight, only that same look she'd worn when she first watched him fix the heater. Soft, curious, present. When the pizza was gone and Emily had drifted off to sleep mid-story, Ethan carefully tucked a blanket around her. Evelyn whispered, "She's incredible." "She's everything," he replied quietly. And in that moment, surrounded by pizza crusts and the glow of a single table lamp, Evelyn realized she didn't miss the view from the penthouse one bit. Because here, in this tiny rented house, warmth wasn't something installed, it was lived in. The conference room was colder than usual, not because of the thermostat. Sinclair Tower had state-of-the-art climate control, but because of the people inside it. 12 board members sat in polished leather chairs around a table that had hosted mergers, acquisitions, and empire-building decisions. And now, without saying it outright, they were here to discuss her personal life. Evelyn sat at the head, back straight, face calm, fingers laced gently over a manila folder she hadn't opened. David Klein, CFO, cleared his throat first. "Evelyn, there's concern." She didn't flinch. "About the quarterly forecasts?" No, said Elise, head of legal, gently but firmly. About perception. The word hung in the air like smoke. The photo's gone viral, another member added. You dancing with a man no one recognizes, and now he's being called the Mechanic Prince in press headlines. Evelyn gave a single nod. I saw. David leaned forward. We're not saying you've done anything wrong, but optics matter. Investors don't like unpredictability, and dating someone outside of... Outside of what? Evelyn interrupted, her tone still calm. The Fortune 500? The guest list at charity auctions? There was an uncomfortable pause. It could distract from the brand, Elise offered. From your brand, the empire your father built, the one you grew. Evelyn's eyes didn't waver. And you think sitting on a milk crate with a man who fixes heaters is enough to undo all that? No one answered, but their silence said enough. She took a breath and leaned back slightly in her chair. Thank you for your feedback, but last I checked, I wasn't required to ask permission to have dinner with someone who makes my life feel real. The room shifted. A few glances exchanged, but Evelyn didn't blink. She stood gathering her folder and her composure. I've given this company everything, she said quietly, her voice sharper now. And I will continue to, but don't mistake my presence here for dependence. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked out, her heels echoing down the marble corridor. She didn't slam the door, she didn't raise her voice, but the message was clear. They had built a world for her, and for the first time in years, she was choosing to step outside of it. It started with a hiss, barely noticeable over the hum of the old radiator. Ethan had just finished rinsing a dish when he heard it, faint but steady, like air slipping through clenched teeth. Then came the groan, a low moaning sound from inside the walls, followed by a sharp pop and the unmistakable rush of water. He dropped the plate and sprinted to the hallway. By the time he reached the bathroom, it was too late. A pipe behind the wall had given out, sending a spray of cold water gushing through the plaster like a busted fire hydrant. Towels, buckets, nothing slowed it. Within minutes, water had spread across the warped floors, soaking under Emily's bedroom door and bleeding into the living room. Ethan scrambled, slipping once as he shut off the main valve, heart pounding, hands numb. The house was old, he knew it needed work, but he'd been hoping for just one more winter without a catastrophe. Emily stood in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in her pajamas, clutching her bear. "Daddy?" she whispered. "I got it," he said quickly, trying to sound steady. "Just a broken pipe." She looked at the floor. "It's like the bathroom's crying." He couldn't argue with that. By morning, the damage was clear. Warped floorboards, soaked baseboards, mold waiting to happen. He sat at the table with his head in his hands, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him, when he heard the knock. Evelyn. She stood on the porch, bundled in a thick coat, her expression somewhere between concern and determination. "I heard," she said, not even waiting to be invited in. "I can send someone to fix it." "I'll handle it," Ethan said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Just need a few days." She nodded. "Then stay at my place. The guest house is empty, warm, dry." He shook his head before she even finished. "I don't want a handout, Evelyn." Her eyes softened. "It's not a handout, it's a roof." Before he could respond, Emily's voice came from behind him. "Can we, Daddy? Just for a little bit? I don't like the house being sad." Ethan looked down at her, her wet socks, the sleep still in her eyes, and exhaled. "Just for a little bit," he murmured. And that night, in a warm guest house with clean sheets and working plumbing, they didn't feel like guests. They felt safe. The guest house sat at the edge of Evelyn's estate, tucked between two weeping willows and a stone garden path that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. It wasn't ostentatious, at least not by Evelyn Sinclair standards. More like a luxury cottage with high ceilings, soft lighting, and furniture so clean it made Ethan nervous just breathing near it. He set their overnight bag down by the front door, eyeing the cream-colored rug like it might judge his boots. Emily, on the other hand, had already kicked hers off and was twirling through the open space, arms stretched out like she was in a Disney movie. "Daddy, it smells like soap and flowers and rich people," she whispered, wide-eyed. Ethan chuckled. "That's lavender." And yes, definitely rich people. The awkwardness was immediate and undeniable. Evelyn had stocked the fridge, fluffed the pillows, and left a note with the Wi-Fi password written in impossibly neat cursive. She offered to give them space for the night, but when Emily asked, rather loudly, if she could stay for dinner, Ethan didn't have the heart to say no. So she did. They ate together at the small dining table, grilled cheese for Emily, reheated stew for Ethan, and some delicacy Evelyn pulled from her kitchen that turned out to be caviar. Emily took one bite, made a face like she'd eaten a fish-flavored jelly bean, and whispered, "It's like the ocean sneezed in my mouth." Evelyn nearly choked on her wine, laughing. Later, while Emily watched a cartoon curled under a throw blanket so soft it might have been woven by angels, Ethan noticed the front window sticking slightly off track. Instinct took over. He rummaged through his tool bag, adjusted the latch, and realigned the frame in 10 minutes flat. Evelyn watched from the hallway, smiling. "You really can't sit still, can you?" Ethan shrugged. "Place this nice shouldn't have squeaky windows." She tilted her head, studying him like she had that first night on the dance floor. Neither should people. That night, after Emily was tucked in and the lights were low, Evelyn lay in her bed upstairs, listening to the wind move through the trees. No emails, no news alerts, no deadlines. Just warmth. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she slept through the night. The envelope arrived on a Thursday, hand-delivered by a courier who looked more out of place in Maplewood than a tuxedo at a tailgate. He handed the envelope to Ethan with a tight nod and disappeared before any questions could be asked. Ethan held it like it might explode. Thick cardstock, deep navy blue, embossed with silver foil. He didn't need to open it to know who it was from, but he opened it anyway. "You're cordially invited to the Sinclair Foundation. Winter ball, formal attire, Saturday 7 p.m. A dance floor always has room for a second chance. No signature, just that line." Ethan set the invitation on the counter and stared at it like it had insulted his parenting. The last time he'd danced with Evelyn, it was spontaneous, anonymous, simple. This was everything it hadn't been, public, planned, and very, very real. He was halfway through composing a polite text to decline when Emily wandered into the kitchen, still in her mismatched pajamas, dragging her socked feet across the floor. "What's that?" she asked, peering over his arm. "Just a fancy party invite." She gasped. "Is it from her?" He nodded once. "Yeah." "Well, are we going?" Ethan exhaled. "I was thinking maybe—" "No." Emily frowned. "Why not?" He tried to find the right words. "Because I'm not sure I belong there." She studied him for a moment, like she did when trying to decode the rules of a board game. Then, without a word, she walked to the hallway closet, reached into the back, and returned with the dusty garment bag that held his one suit, the same one he'd worn to her school play and his father's funeral. "We can fix it up," she said. "It's not about the tie, right?" He hesitated. She tugged his hand. "She danced with you once before, didn't she? Before the invitations and the fancy paper?" "Yeah," he said quietly. "Then go show her you're still that guy." An hour later, with his shirt ironed and his collar up, Ethan stood in front of the mirror as Emily looped the tie around his neck, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in concentration. "Too tight?" she asked. He smiled. "Perfect." And just like that, the answer became simple. He was going. The winter ball glittered like something out of a dream. Icicle lights draped from vaulted ceilings. Candles flickered in crystal holders along every table. The orchestra played with gentle grace, each note cascading like fresh snow, and the clink of champagne flutes filled the air with practiced elegance. Everyone was dressed in black and silver, as if the dress code had been whispered to the stars. Ethan Cole had never been more overdressed or more aware of it. The suit fit better than he remembered. The tie was still a little crooked. Emily had tied it with love, not precision, but somehow that made it feel more like armor than decoration. He stood near the edge of the ballroom, nursing a glass of something sparkling that didn't taste like anything he could name. He had no plan, no script, just one anchor in the chaos. And there she was. Evelyn moved through the crowd like she owned the oxygen. All grace and confidence, every step deliberate but unforced. When her eyes found his across the room, the corners of her mouth lifted, soft and sure, and the chaos in his chest settled. She made her way over, and just as she reached him, a man in a sleek tuxedo, someone tall, polished, and painfully curious, stepped between them. "Evelyn," he said with a too smooth smile, "and this must be—" The pause hung in the air, the question hovering like it had weight. Ethan didn't speak. He wasn't sure if he was supposed to. Evelyn didn't miss a beat. She glanced at Ethan, then back at the man, smile unwavering. "This is Ethan Cole," she said, voice clear and calm. "Someone I'm learning from every day." The man blinked. "Oh." Evelyn didn't explain further. She didn't need to. They left the man standing there, curiosity unfulfilled, and stepped onto the dance floor like they had months ago. But this time, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. As Ethan slid his hand to the small of her back, he leaned in. "What exactly are you learning from me?" She smiled. "How to be real." And they danced, not to disappear, but to be seen, together. The night had grown quiet long after the guests had gone, and the glittering echoes of the winter ball had faded into memory. The Sinclair estate, usually pulsing with staff and meetings and movement, now sat hushed under a blanket of moonlight. Evelyn had taken off her heels hours ago. Her silver gown was traded for a faded sweatshirt and leggings, her hair pulled into a loose knot that had given up on perfection. Downstairs, in the kitchen, big enough to cater a wedding, she stood barefoot on cold tile, leaning over the stove as she reheated leftover lasagna from 2 nights ago, the kind with too much cheese and no garnish, the kind that actually tasted better now than it had fresh. Ethan sat at the marble island, sleeves rolled up, watching her with a quiet smile. His tie had long since come undone, draped over a chair like a flag of surrender. Emily had fallen asleep upstairs hours earlier, with a book still open on her chest. The guest house felt too quiet now, so Evelyn had offered food. He'd said yes. "This place is too nice for lasagna," he said, stretching his arms. Evelyn shrugged, plating the food without ceremony. Every palace needs one peasant dish. She handed him a plate and joined him at the counter. They ate in comfortable silence, the only soundtrack the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of fork against porcelain. "This is good," he admitted. "I told you, magic on day 3. He looked at her then, really looked. Not the CEO, not the woman in the silver dress, just Evelyn. Wearing soft cotton and no makeup, hair slightly wild, face lit by the under-cabinet lights, and she was laughing about lasagna. She caught the look in his eyes and paused. "What?" He set down his fork. "I've been trying not to do something for weeks." Evelyn leaned in, chin resting on her palm. "Do it anyway." So he did. He kissed her. No speech, no build-up. Just a slow, steady lean forward and a kiss that didn't ask for permission because the answer had already been written in every moment they hadn't said out loud. When they pulled apart, Evelyn exhaled, like something had finally landed in place. "That," she whispered, "tastes even better than the lasagna." Ethan grinned. "Told you I was full of surprises." Ethan was elbow-deep in a carburetor when Nate burst into the garage, holding his phone like it was radioactive. "Dude, you're in the news." Ethan didn't even look up. "Again?" "No, like really in the news. Big glossy headline, picture, and everything." Ethan sighed. wiped his hands on a rag, and took the phone. There it was, blaring across a celebrity gossip site with a logo he didn't recognize. Heiress in heels, Evelyn Sinclair's secret romance with former waiter. Beneath it, a blurry photo of him and Evelyn dancing at the winter ball. The caption read, "Sinclair shares tender moment with mystery staffer turned sweetheart." He blinked. "Waiter?" Nate shrugged. "At least they didn't call you the janitor." Ethan laughed. Not because it was funny, but because if he didn't, he might get stuck in the absurdity of it all. He was still shaking his head when Evelyn's number lit up on his screen. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said. "So apparently I served drinks in a past life." She didn't laugh. "I saw it," she said, voice tight. "They spun it exactly how I knew they would." Ethan leaned against the workbench. "It's fine. Let them think what they want." "No," she said firmly. "It's not fine. You're not some background extra in my life, Ethan. You're not a prop or a charity case or—" "A waiter," he added dryly. That earned a quiet exhale. "I want to tell the truth," Evelyn said. "Not to defend us, but because what we have deserves better than a headline written by someone who wasn't there." He was quiet for a moment, staring at the photo again. In the picture, he looked like a man in love, and maybe that's why they got it wrong, because love doesn't care about status, and tabloids don't know how to write about honesty. "You sure you want to do that?" he asked. "Put it all out there?" "I'm sure," she said. "Let's tell the real story." And just like that, Ethan realized something even the gossip sites couldn't distort. She wasn't hiding him. She was standing beside him. The studio lights were brighter than Ethan expected, hot, blinding, the kind that made you sweat before you even said a word. He shifted in his seat, fingers laced awkwardly in his lap, trying not to tug at the stiff collar of the suit jacket he hadn't worn since prom. Beside him, Emily swung her feet beneath the chair, her patent leather shoes clicking gently against each other as she tried to sit still, which for her was heroic. Evelyn looked effortless as always, composed in a soft blue dress, her expression calm, eyes focused. But her hand brushed Ethan's under the table just once, enough to say, "You're not doing this alone." The host smiled for the camera, voice polished and practiced. "Tonight, we're joined by Evelyn Sinclair, business leader, philanthropist, and the man behind the story everyone's talking about, Ethan Cole, along with his daughter, Emily." Emily grinned and gave a little wave. The audience melted. "So," the host continued, "let's talk about that photo. You, Evelyn Sinclair, dancing with a mystery man at your own gala. It took the internet by storm, and now here he is." Ethan offered a small, sheepish smile. "Didn't mean to break the internet. I was just there to fix a heater." Laughter filled the room. Evelyn leaned forward. "He wasn't just there to fix something. He showed up when no one else could. He helped without asking for anything. And then he danced with me, without knowing who I was. That's what made it special." The host smiled. "People are calling this a modern Cinderella story. How do you respond to that?" Evelyn looked at Ethan, then at Emily, then back at the camera. "It's not about fairy tales," she said, "and it's not about wealth or status or surprise romance. It's about kindness. That's what drew me to Ethan. He's decent, he's present. He's the kind of man who'd fix your broken car and never take credit for it. And in a world where everyone's trying to impress you, he just is." The clip hit the internet within hours. By morning, it had millions of views, not because it was glamorous, but because it was real. And in a culture that thrived on scandal, the world paused for one quiet, remarkable truth. Sometimes love begins with a wrench, a dance, and the courage to be seen. The offer came in the form of a folded envelope slipped across the table between 2 coffee mugs and a half-eaten cinnamon roll. Ethan eyed it like it might contain a parking ticket, or worse, a thank you note with too many zeros. Evelyn said nothing at first, just waited, elbows on the table, watching him the way she always did when something mattered more than she was letting on. He opened it slowly, brow furrowing as he skimmed the top line. Sinclair Properties, Internal Facilities and Fleet Division, Director of Operations. He blinked. You want me to run something? Evelyn nodded. It's not just something. You'd be overseeing our company vehicles, on-site maintenance teams, facilities repairs. Every location we own would report to you. He looked at her like she'd suggested he pilot a space shuttle. You know, I didn't go to college, right? I know. And I've never managed a team bigger than 2 guys and a dog named Earl who used to chew brake cables. She smiled. I read the reference from Earl. It was glowing. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the paper still in his hands. Why me? Because you fix things, she said simply. Not just engines, not just pipes or heaters or rattling fan belts. You fix what's in front of you, and you do it without drama or shortcuts. You've made more order out of chaos with duct tape and a toolbox than most people do with degrees and consultants. He was quiet for a long moment, eyes still on the page, like he was waiting for it to vanish. Then he looked up. What if I mess it up? Evelyn's voice softened. Then you'll fix it. He exhaled slowly, still not sure if he could say yes. But deep down, a part of him, long buried beneath years of scraping by, started to believe maybe, just maybe, he could build something more. And maybe this wasn't a rescue. Maybe it was a partnership between a woman who built empires and a man who never asked for more than a chance to show what he could do with a set of tools and a little faith. The night was quiet in the guest house, the kind of hush that only came after a long day and a warm meal. Rain tapped gently against the windows, a soft percussion that made the world feel smaller, safer. Ethan stood in the hallway, arms crossed loosely over his chest, listening. Inside Emily's room, Evelyn's voice drifted through the cracked door, low and soothing, as she read the final lines of Goodnight Moon. The book was worn from years of use, its corners frayed, the pages soft with familiarity. But Emily didn't mind. She loved when someone else read it, especially when that someone was Evelyn. And good night to the old lady whispering, "Hush," Evelyn finished, her voice wrapping around the last word like a lullaby. Emily yawned, her head already sinking into the pillow. "Thanks for reading," she murmured sleepily. "Of course," Evelyn whispered, brushing a curl from the girl's forehead. Emily's eyes fluttered, half shut. Then, without thought, without hesitation, she said it. "Good night, Mom." Silence. Evelyn's breath caught, her hand stilled. For a moment the world narrowed to that one small word, one syllable, unplanned, unforced. Ethan heard it from the hallway. He didn't move. Evelyn didn't correct her. She didn't laugh or cry. She just leaned down and kissed Emily's forehead, a soft press of her lips that said everything without a single word. "Good night, sweetheart," she whispered back. Emily was already asleep. Evelyn stepped out into the hallway, the door clicking softly behind her. Ethan was still there, leaning against the wall, his expression unreadable. "She didn't mean," Evelyn started, but Ethan shook his head gently. "She did," he said. "She just didn't plan to." They stood there for a while in the quiet, the rain still whispering against the glass. Neither of them said what they were thinking, that the word wasn't a mistake or a slip or something to fix. It was something true, something earned not through blood or paperwork, but by presence, by stories read, by kindness shown, by love, and neither of them corrected it. The morning was ordinary in every visible way. Ethan stood at the kitchen counter, spreading peanut butter on 2 slices of bread, while Emily bounced around behind him, trying to decide whether she wanted an apple or a cookie for lunch. The sky outside was gray but calm. The coffee was hot. The toaster still burned one side of every slice, like clockwork. Evelyn sat at the table, dressed for a meeting, but not in a rush, sipping her tea and watching them both with that quiet smile she wore more and more lately, like she was memorizing the moment without needing to say so. Ethan packed the sandwich into Emily's lunchbox, added a napkin, a juice box, and finally the cookie, after a very persuasive negotiation. "Ready to roll, Well," he asked, zipping the bag shut. Emily nodded, throwing on her backpack. "Race you to the truck." He followed her out, waving to Evelyn as he did every morning now, the rhythm of their days syncing in ways that felt too natural to question. It wasn't until lunchtime, hours later, when he opened the empty lunchbox back at the shop to clean it out, that he saw it. A folded piece of paper, neatly tucked under the napkin, his name on the outside, written in Evelyn's graceful script. He frowned, brow furrowed, and unfolded it slowly. Would it be okay if we kept dancing? That was all it said. No signature, no flourish, just the question. He read it twice, then once more. The simplicity of it landing harder than any grand gesture ever could. There was no ring, no kneeling, no spotlight. Just a woman who had everything, asking a man who never expected more than a quiet life if they could keep going, one small shared step at a time. He folded the note back carefully, placed it in his coat pocket, and leaned back on the stool beside the workbench. And he smiled. Not the kind of smile people posed for, the kind that settled deep in the chest. Because the answer wasn't just yes, it had always been yes. The grand reopening wasn't grand in the way most would expect. No ribbon-cutting ceremony, no swarm of press, no flashy speeches or choreographed photo ops, just a few folding chairs, 2 coolers of lemonade, and the entire town of Maplewood gathered around a building that looked both brand new and exactly the same. The garage still had the original brick facade, but the roof no longer sagged, and the oil stains had been scrubbed from the concrete, like someone was trying to erase years of quiet sacrifice. The bay doors gleamed with fresh paint, the office windows sparkled, and above it all hung a brand-new wooden sign, carved by hand. Turner and Sinclair Auto, fueled by grit. Backed by grace. Ethan stood beneath it in a clean work shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a wrench still sticking out of his back pocket. Evelyn stood beside him in jeans and boots, her hair pulled back, her sunglasses tucked into the collar of her tee. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't a sponsor. She was part of it now. The townspeople milled around, sipping lemonade, eating cookies off paper napkins, and pretending not to stare at the two of them. A few had whispered judgments months ago. Now they offered nods, handshakes, even a few hugs. "I never thought I'd see the day," Nate muttered, standing beside Ethan as they admired the sign. "Your name next to hers. In wood." Ethan chuckled. "Me neither. You do realize you're basically in a romance novel now, right?" Ethan smirked. "Don't ruin it." Inside, the shop was still a shop, smelling of rubber and motor oil, tools arranged just the way Ethan liked. But now there were newer machines, better lighting, a break room that didn't leak, and 2 job applications already pinned to the corkboard. Evelyn turned to him as the last of the guests began to wander off. "So? So what? Does it feel real yet?" Ethan looked at the sign, then at her, then toward the small house down the road where Emily waited with a lunchbox drawing tape to the fridge. "Yeah," he said, "it does now." And it wasn't just a garage anymore, it was theirs. Maplewood had always been a town with long memories and short patience for outsiders. They noticed everything: who didn't mow their lawn, who switched churches, who drove out-of-town plates and lingered too long at the diner without ordering pie. So when Evelyn Sinclair, CEO of a luxury empire, started showing up at Cole's Auto in boots instead of stilettos, they whispered. They whispered when she carried her own coffee into the garage, when she sat on milk crates and asked how brake pads worked, when she helped sweep the shop floor after closing time. But then she stayed. She didn't buy a mansion outside of town. She didn't fly in and out by helicopter. She bought groceries at the same store where Mrs. Finley gossiped behind the register. She attended the fall festival and actually volunteered, working the booth next to the PTA bake sale like she'd been doing it for years. She even burned a tray of cookies and laughed about it right in front of everyone. That was the moment, some would later say, when the town started to change its mind. Because Evelyn didn't just bring money, she brought presents. She showed up at town meetings not to speak but to listen. She smiled when she was introduced as Ethan's partner, and never once corrected anyone to add business or romantic. She cheered loudest when Emily scored her first soccer goal, even louder than Ethan did. And when Old Man Kessler's radiator gave out in the middle of a snowstorm, she didn't send someone. She drove out with Ethan herself, holding the flashlight while he worked, her heels swapped out for mismatched wool socks under her boots. One by one, the neighbors stopped whispering. They started waving, started offering extra peaches from their orchards, asking how her girls were doing, inviting her to Sunday pancake breakfasts without hesitation. And Evelyn never once acted surprised by their acceptance, because she hadn't stayed to prove anything. She stayed because it felt like home, not because of the quiet or the comfort, but because here, in this small town that once doubted her, she wasn't the woman from the magazine. She was just Evelyn, and that was more than enough. The new sign glowed proudly above the garage, polished wood catching the late afternoon sun, its letters carved deep and permanent. Turner and Sinclair Auto, fueled by grit, backed by grace. It looked like it belonged there, like it had always been part of Maplewood's skyline. But inside the shop, nothing about Ethan Cole had changed. He still wore the same scuffed boots and kept the same lucky wrench in his back pocket. His hands were just as calloused, his sleeves always rolled up, his face smudged with grease by noon. If anyone expected him to stop fixing things now that his name was on a sign next to a woman with private jets and quarterly reports, they hadn't been paying attention. He still took walk-ins without appointments, still traded repairs for pies, produce, or school fundraiser coupons when someone was short on cash. Last Tuesday, he spent 2 hours fixing Mrs. Carmichael's toaster, not because it was hard, but because it had been her wedding gift in 1974, and made toast just right. Ethan understood that kind of attachment. This morning he patched up a rusted Schwinn for a kid down the road who wanted to surprise his little sister for her birthday. Yesterday he rewired the community center's flickering hallway lights. And when someone's kitchen faucet burst during a storm last week, he was there in 10 minutes, boots on, toolbox in hand, Evelyn right behind him holding a flashlight and grinning like she wouldn't rather be anywhere else. He was still the guy people called when things went wrong, still the one who showed up, and he liked it that way. At night he came home to the guest house that no longer felt borrowed. Emily met him at the door, arms flung around his waist, backpack already half unzipped with stories to tell. Sometimes Evelyn would be there with dinner already on the stove, or sometimes he'd beat her back from a late meeting. Either way, they'd end up side by side, eating, laughing, listening. He had a name on a building now, a new job, a woman who saw him without filters. But none of that changed what he did best. He fixed things. Not just machines, people, days, broken little corners of life. And in a world that moved too fast and forgot too easily, Ethan Cole remained exactly who he was, a man who showed up, rolled up his sleeves, and quietly made everything a little better. Years later, the desks were smaller than she remembered. Emily Cole stood in front of her second-grade classroom, hands clasped behind her back, the morning sun pouring through the tall windows and casting golden stripes across the whiteboard. It was Family Legacy Week, and each student had been asked to bring in a story, something about where they came from or who inspired them. Most kids brought photos. One talked about a grandfather who flew planes. Another held up a quilt stitched by great-grandma's hands. But when it was Emily's turn, she didn't bring anything to show. Just a memory she'd heard 100 times, and still never got tired of telling. So, she began, her voice steady and clear, my dad met my mom at a party, but not like a birthday party, like a really big party, with sparkly lights and violins, and people who use words like cordially. A few classmates giggled. The teacher smiled. But my dad wasn't invited. He was just there to fix the heater because the rich people didn't like being cold. And my mom, well, she was one of those rich people. Only she didn't act like it. Emily's eyes twinkled. She thought he was a waiter. He didn't tell her otherwise. She asked him to dance anyway. The classroom was quiet now. Every ear tuned in. They didn't even know each other's names, but they danced in the middle of that big, fancy ballroom like they were the only ones there, and after that, everything changed. She paused just for effect, then added softly, "But not him. He stayed the same." A hand shot up in the back. "Wait, your mom is that Evelyn Sinclair?" Emily nodded with a grin. "Yep, she runs hotels, but she also makes the best grilled cheese and reads bedtime stories with voices." Another kid leaned forward. What happened to the heater?" Emily beamed. "He fixed it, of course." And in that moment, as chalk dust floated in the air and wide eyes stared back at her in wonder, she realized something. Her parents hadn't meant to become a story, but they had, and now she got to tell it. The kitchen wasn't big. The floor tiles were slightly uneven, and one cabinet door creaked when you opened it too far. The overhead light flickered now and then, and the radio on the counter only picked up 2 stations, one of which insisted on playing country covers of pop songs. But to Evelyn, it was perfect. She stirred a pot of soup as Ethan dried dishes beside her, their movements moving in rhythm, like muscle memory born of hundreds of quiet evenings just like this. Emily sat at the table, chin propped in her hands, eyes heavy with the kind of sleep that only pretends to wait until after dessert. And then, from the corner, the radio crackled, and a slow, familiar tune began to play. Evelyn turned the burner down. Ethan raised an eyebrow. She didn't speak. She just stepped toward him, held out her hand, and smiled. He chuckled. "Here?" "Why not?" she said, already tugging him closer. He set the towel aside and took her hand, the same one he'd held in a ballroom months ago, under chandeliers and camera flashes. But this was better. No tuxedos, no marble floors. Just bare feet on cool tile, the scent of garlic in the air, and Emily giggling softly as she watched her parents sway. Ethan pulled Evelyn close, one hand at her waist, the other wrapped gently in hers. "You're still a better dancer than me," he murmured. "You're getting there," she teased. "Give it a decade." The song played on, soft and low, wrapping around them like a warm blanket. Then small feet padded across the floor, and Emily wedged herself between them with all the determination of a child who'd never been told no. "Me too," she said. Ethan scooped her up, and just like that, the 3 of them turned slowly in the glow of a flickering light, laughter mingling with music, arms intertwined. No cameras, no headlines, no expectations, just a family. Built not by blood or fame, but by moments like this. Quiet, ordinary, full of grace. And in the soft spin of that small kitchen, they danced. Because they could, because they stayed, because they'd found something that didn't need to be fixed. They'd found each other.